correspondent Christian Amanpour, who just left Iran last night. Also Reza Aslan, author of How to Win a Cosmic War, as well as political scientist Kafeh Afrasiabi, who has taught in Iran and the States and briefly consulted on nuclear talks with the Iranian government. Christian, you had to leave Iran last night. Your visa expired. What can you tell us about the crackdown on foreign journalists that we've been hearing about?
Well, I think what Reza said was correct. As you can see, they can report, and you saw what we did when we were there. We were not censored. We weren't prevented from being in the rallies. There were very tense moments, and we were frankly afraid of those hardline Basij, the militia who are in plain clothes, who have a fearsome reputation, and who we've seen wield their ugly batons and their tempers against both the protesters and the press. But they are worried about those people. And the last thing the Iranian government wants is journalist blood on their hands. So I think that's one of the reasons. The big question is, what happens when all the visas expire and the journalists do have to leave and they're not renewing them? What happens on the ground when that takes place? So far, it looks to me like the government has taken a decision to allow these protests on the street and to sort of play out the political dilemma right now, the political confrontation on the streets in a mostly peaceful way, as you can see with these rallies over the last 2 days.
But Christian, it's not just concern over journalist safety. I mean, that's making the Iranian government say, well, look, don't go out to these anti-Ahmadinejad rallies, because they're allowing coverage of the pro-Ahmadinejad rallies, no?
Well, they're not. They didn't let the press go down there. That pro-Ahmadinejad rally was covered by Iranian state media, as far as I can gather. I was told that none of our colleagues or others could go down to that either.
So Iranian state media is covering... No, you're right. Iranian state media is covering the pro, but not covering the anti.
Yeah, well, yeah. And the Iranian state media never covered any of Mousavi's rallies before the election. Ahmadinejad had sole access to the media throughout the election and now in the post-election period. So that's absolutely right.
Okay. Reza, what is your take on what's going on here?
Well, I think that this is no longer just about the disputed elections. This is about the very legitimacy of the government, which is why we're seeing all these unusual coalitions forming, so that very high-ranking clerics, in fact, the most senior ayatollahs in Iran, Ayatollah Montazeri and Ayatollah Sanei, have both issued fatwas condemning the vote rigging. You have Ayatollah Rafsanjani, perhaps the second most powerful man in Iran, forming a coalition with former President Mohammad Khatami, both of whom are working behind the scenes to try to pressure the supreme leader to annul this vote. And you even have now members of the military who have said very publicly that they refuse to open fire on the protesters. I have to tell you, having lived through the revolution of 1979, this is eerily familiar.
Kaveh, you have a different perspective. You don't believe that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad stole this election. What makes you sure of that when in the hometown of Mousavi, even Ahmadinejad won there by like 57 to 42%?
Well, this is also an area where the supreme leader, who's from that region, is popular. Mr. Ahmadinejad himself speaks the language and has done a lot of work, not only in that region, but also in rural Iran and in small towns where the overwhelming majority of Iranian voters live. You know, the Mousavi supporters in the streets of Tehran are the winning party, and somehow they've led themselves to believe, and this is really a case of misperception, that they should have also won in the rest of the country, and there's no evidence to corroborate that. And so far, we have not seen anything other than hearsay and scintilla of evidence to corroborate these large-scale violations that have been alleged by Mr. Mousavi and Mr. Karoubi. So really the burden of proof is on these candidates, because they had their own independent monitors in addition to 2 sets of official monitors to document the violations and submit them to the Election Commission. Right. And in my opinion, having sifted through the information, they have not carried that burden.
Christian, what do you think about that?
Sorry, I don't know whether you saw me gesticulating there, but one of the problems was that actually there weren't monitors at all the polling stations. There were meant to be, but many of the Mousavi monitors weren't accredited, and I saw that with my own eyes, because we were at many of the polling stations in Tehran, which Mousavi won. It's one of the only places where the election officials say he actually won. Many of those polling stations didn't have monitors, so that's an issue. Plus, one of the things that got the Mousavi camp all worried from the beginning of of Election Day was this crackdown and banning of the SMS messages. As you know, Mr. Ahmadinejad, the incumbent, had the whole weight of the state behind him, the resources, the media. But Mousavi and the others had to have grassroots organizations to organize their rallies. And SMS text was one of the main ways they did it. And on Election Day, the texts were down. You couldn't text. And what they say is that that prevented them getting the sort of real-time information from all the exit polls. And if you remember, on the evening of Election Day, Mr. Mousavi held a press conference and said that according to his campaign workers who had called in, that they had won. He used it, he said, definitely won. And then immediately thereafter, out came the Interior Ministry and said that actually no, initial results show that it's a 2-to-1 lead for Ahmadinejad. Now, even the most optimistic observers believe that it would be close, not the kind of results they saw. And that's what's causing the problem on the streets right now, that it didn't even go to a second round.
And Reza, where do you see
wait a second.
Reza, where do you see it going now? I mean, where do you see if the Mousavi supporters want a redo of the election, the government's saying that's not going to happen, how does this thing resolve itself, or does it?
It really remains to be seen. There's some very interesting things that are taking place right now. Some of my sources in Iran have told me that Ayatollah Rafsanjani, who is the head of the Assembly of Experts, it's an 86-member clerical body that decides who will be the next supreme leader, and is, by the way, the only group that is empowered to remove the supreme leader from power, that they have issued an emergency meeting in Qom. Now, Anderson, I have to tell you, there's only one reason for the Assembly of Experts to meet at this point, and that is to actually talk about what to do about Khamenei. So this is what I'm saying, is that we're talking about the very legitimacy, the very foundation of the Islamic Republic is up in the air right now. It's hard to say where this is going to go.
We have to leave it there. Kaveh Afrasiabi, we appreciate your time. Reza Aslan, Christian Amanpour
Sure.
as well. As always, you can learn a lot more online at ac360.com, where tonight you can read about how the U.S.